Everybody. We're looking forward to an exciting meeting here. It's Crisis Management for COVID-19, week 25. Hard to believe we've been going on this long. We've got a bunch of updates for you. A lot of things changed since last week, so we got updates and guidance on legal issues, but we're also going to spend a little time. Everybody said they like the legal, but they also need the HR side of it. So we asked John Coffey to join us. He's our Director of Talent Acquisition. John has a terrific history with HR. He's been doing recruiting for over 15 years, and he's worked with some big outfits like Manpower and others. And in that job, he's worked with clients all across the nation and sort of around the world. He's worked with Verizon and Expedia and Google and Yahoo and Halliburton and Abbott Labs. Just a lot of good experience that he brings to Kentucky and to our shop. And so he's going to talk about how's this hiring going during this crazy time. So he'll be coming on last, but so hang with us. Now, one other quick announcement. And the past couple of weeks, we've opened it up. We've turned it on so everybody could speak at the end. And we put everybody's picture up there. If you want to turn your video on, we can see you. And we just are doing it for fun, just so you can get to know some of the people that are on here and just say hello. And this time I thought if you'll join us, you just hang around for a few minutes at the end. I want to hear from you. What do you think about working from home versus working at work? Be a fun little topic just to bat around for a few minutes. Let's step off to the next thing. It's going to be Jim Morris. You guys know Jim, a terrific attorney who's been keeping us up to date on this stuff. And I tell you what, I don't think he sleeps because he's always working on this. And when you look at all the stuff he's collected, just some of it since Friday, he's got a lot to talk about. Jim, what's hot? What's not?
All right. Well, so good morning, everyone. Angie, I'm trying to find the answer to your question. The answer is they haven't done anything. We'll cover that here in a minute. So those that haven't been checking the chat, question was about the tightening of e-claims and how they plan on handling that at the state level. I'll drag that down on the screen here in a minute, but there's not a whole lot of real updates from Kentucky on anything, including the unemployment. So let me jump right into this. We've got a lot to cover. No, I have no congressional update. I have no phase 5, 4, 3.5, 4.5, whatever you want to call it. Congress is still on vacation. They said don't bother them. The beach was nice and warm. They're social distancing. They're doing everything the right way. Just be happy they're on vacation because they can do little harm to us while they're there. No, they didn't tell me to say that, but it's kind of frustrating to see that they're not cleaning things up like they said. If they're not going to do anything, just tell us you're not going to. All right, so I do have a lot of updates. I have one on each different topic. Believe it or not, PPP has roared its ugly head again. If you've already spent the money, you may have to go back and do a loan. Those are for only select people, and I'll explain that in a second. First, let me start out with the biggest question I've had this week from all of my clients and from a lot of you. Last week, this week, week before last was what's the guidance from what we're supposed to do as an employer? Are we mandated to do this or are we not? How do we go about withholding under the executive order from the president? So let me just walk you through it. On August the 8th, as we talked about, there were 4 different things that President Trump signed into law. One of them was the federal unemployment continuation. That was the $300 from the federal, started out as $400, and then we talked about the fact that it was no longer $400, it was $300 plus $100 from the state. Originally, it still was this way, but they just reworded it. It was $400 if the state contributed $100. Now it's $300 as long as the state already has $100 or more. Well, Kentucky objected to that. And then if you recall last week, I point out that even though Kentucky objected to the $100 contribution, they announced a week before last, surprise, we're going to do a $100 contribution. It should start in mid-September. This is just background. This is not new. Renter and homeowner assistance, same thing. The federal government's going to assist anyone that is subject to any kind of loans from the federal government. Extension of student loans, same thing as last week, 0% interest rate, 0 payments through the end of the year. The big one is the payroll tax holiday. As of last Monday, I told you all that no, there was no guidance, zero guidance, didn't have any clue, wasn't able to tell you whether this was going to be mandatory, discretionary, how you go about discretionary, what you're supposed to do, or anything. Well, Friday night, the Internal Revenue Service and the U.S. Treasury Department came out with a new announcement. That announcement is basically, if I can be sarcastic a little bit, I have a special word for it called synarcastical, cynical, sarcastic, comical, and critical. As an employer, don't do it. That's the answer. It's one of the more bizarre. It was a good attempt. It was trying to get Congress to move. I think that the Treasury has come out and basically said, yeah, we don't feel comfortable doing this, so we're not going to be able to. But the gist of it is this. If you voluntarily engage in this, you, the employer, still have to pay your portion in, deposit your portion in. You don't have to pay the part that you deposit in until January 1st. The employee gets to keep their part of what the employer is supposed to pay until January 1st. And then the employer will have to double up payments from the employee to pay it all before April 30th. So while it's a tax holiday and while this has nothing to do with employees and they won't have to do estimated taxes and so on, basically what this amounts to is you won't pay this to the government until January 1st, and then you're going to double up on the employee part, which what you're doing is taking more money out of their pay starting January 1st to make sure that you have paid both the employer and employee part by April 30th. So I'll walk through it with you, but basically what it is, all wages paid to an employee on a paid date between September 1st and December 31st, as long as that employee is not paid more than $4,000 every 2 weeks. Now that's you'll see on there, I talk about equivalency. That's, so if you're paying weekly, that's $2,000 a week. If you're paying monthly, that's 4.3 or the calculation of weeks into months. You have to figure out the equivalency of $4,000 for a biweekly and figure out whether the employee falls under that. If you want to do this, you can, but keep in mind at the beginning of the year, either you're going to take the risk that the Congress will catch up and make this free, or you're going to end up double taking from your employees on the employee portion. My commentary at the bottom, it is not well written. It was clear, and they did come out with an explanation. The White House objected strenuously to how the Treasury was handling this in releasing this, because they basically did not want to have the employer be double taxing the employees starting January 1st, but the Treasury insisted on putting it in there that they were going to double tax starting on January 1st, or that the employer would have to make up the difference starting January 1st and making sure it was done before April 30th. The reason why it didn't get issued until Friday night, i.e. the last day before the week where payments or payroll has to be run, is because nobody liked the way it looked. Everyone was objecting to it. So the end result is, I seriously doubt a single person or single company that wants to do this fairly will take this on. It's going to be a nightmare. It's not what the president wanted. It's not what the executive order wanted. It's really not what the Treasury wanted. IRS basically balked at doing anything, so we're all stuck with a mess on our hands. So everyone who asked, do you have to do it? The answer is no. If you want to see where to get this, it is on the IRS website. It is at irs.gov. I'm going to copy this and put it in the chat for everybody. Sorry, I'm looking off the screen. You can go to here and get the press release. Came out late Friday night. This is where it is on the screen. Whoops, Yeah, that's where it is on the screen. You can take a look at that, and it's a whole lot of fun accounting language. If you don't do your own taxes, you won't want to read it. So next, PPP, interim final rule. You all have heard from me back in April, May, June, the interim final rule. They've come up with so many final rules on PPP that don't even know where they stand right now. But this one was a critical one because everyone will recall we had big issues with what is an owner-employee. We were concerned about, does this go to children, spouses, significant others? What does it mean for the owner itself, that the owner is covered by this? There were all kinds of questions. Well, they came out with guidance, some good, some bad. If you run a small business, chances are the second part of this affects you. And I'm sorry, because this means you've already spent the money and now you're screwed. So you're going to have to figure out, dealing with your lender, how to handle this, because it's going to be a nightmare on forgiveness. So here goes. Basically, on the 24th of August, they came out with a big modification. So we talked in June about the new final interim guidelines that talked about owner employees, no definition. The first one's a good one. Anybody who doesn't own more than 5% in a C Corp or S Corp, you're no longer covered under owner. You are considered just an employee, so it caps it at 5%. I say good just because I had a lot of questions from people about spouses, about children. I still believe they're going to come out and say spouses of someone who's an owner are going to be an owner. That'll be the next shoe that drops. I thought it was going to drop in this announcement first time I saw it. But this does mean that if you own 4% or less or 5% or less, you are not considered an owner employee for purposes of calculating caps. If you own more than that, good luck trying to fix it, because it's a mess and you'll have to go back through and figure out whether you've met the cap or not. The irony is this, and I don't know how legally this is going to work, because all the way back in the beginning of May, end of April, you'll recall me pointing out that there is a frequently asked question that literally says, for PPP, you are bound to the PPP that existed on the date of the application of your PPP loan. And I pull it up, I think it was FAQ number 13, if I'm not mistaken. It might be 31, I may have reversed that. But there was a frequently asked question that literally said, hey, the rules keep changing, which rule am I bound by? And I said, oh, you're not bound by the new rules, you're bound by the rule that existed as of the time of application of the PPP. Well, then they stabbed everybody in the back by announcing the names, addresses, number of employees, and a whole bunch of other private information about employers or about entities that received the PPP loan. You didn't sign up for that. If you got your loan before that date, you never knew that that existed. Yet your name is out there unless you fell under the, I think, $150,000 amount. Your loan fell under the release of private information, private data, which is highly unfair to those of you that applied without realizing that there was going to be release of your private information. Same thing applies here, because I don't know how you can change information after the fact, and yet they did. Basically what they've said under the non-payroll, there's no loan forgiveness for, well, the second one's not a big deal, the third one is the big deal, but I want to point out the second one. You get no household expenses. If you are an independent contractor, you get zero household expenses, you get zero home-based business, and you don't get a loan forgiveness for a tenant. So for example, and they gave several examples, which I don't know why, but let's say you have a building that you own, that you use, and you decided to lease out 25% of this to someone else and you're charging rent. You cannot get the 25% rent, you can only get the 75% that you're paying. The other 25 comes in as income to you, so you don't get to deduct the whole thing. The only entity that can is the entity that leases it from you can get their money if they qualified for a PPP loan. You cannot. No big deal there, but just it's a new wrinkle that they didn't tell us about. The third one is the big one, which is a related party. Rent payments or any other loans or any other information or monies being spent to a related party. That becomes a big issue for anyone who loans from themselves or rents from themselves and you're an owner-occupied business. You cannot deduct more than the mortgage interest owed on the property, and the lease must be older than February 15th. So hypothetically, what that means is, let's say you're on a 30-year lease. My building is. I have a building that we own that we rent to our own business. So this impacts us and it impacts a lot of others. If you have a lease back from an owned building, we were allowed to deduct the entire amount of rent. We have a long-standing lease, so we didn't create it as part of this. We didn't manufacture a situation, and yet what they've done now is after we've spent all of the money, they've come out and said, oh, so you can't do this because you get the money and you're not supposed to get any of the benefit of this as an owner. So we're going to take that out of your calculation, and the only thing that you can get is the mortgage interest. Well, on a 30-year, the mortgage interest is drastically less than the rental amount. And so basically what this does is it drastically impacts, because it's no different than if we were paying a third party. It just punishes us for being the landlord. But basically what this does is it makes it so that you cannot get your entire rent deducted. You're only going to get the mortgage interest, not the mortgage principal. And so if you've been in your location for a while, that mortgage interest is going to be drastically smaller. That's a big amount. Any ownership between the business, any ownership, 1%, 2%, doesn't matter. They've come out with a definition. Any ownership between the business and the property owner is considered a related party. And you must, if you are a related party, here's the fun part, you must provide your lender with the mortgage interest documentation to substantiate the precise amount of mortgage interest, so you can't even guesstimate or give a rounded. You will be limited, and you have to give documentation of all amounts to the lender. This is going to be a substantial amount of additional paperwork for lenders, and I know some of you are now going, wait a minute, do I have to resubmit this to a lender? I had gotten questions from a lot of you about how long does the lender have to answer. We applied for loan forgiveness, and we walked through what the timing is on that. I'm not sure what they're going to do now, because on some of these, the timing is already gone. The lender was required to either forgive or not within a specified time period, and yet now they're getting guidance on the types of things that can't be forgiven. And you've already spent it. If you are on an 8-week instead of 24-week, chances are you've already blown through that money. You paid as much as you could into rent. You paid as much as you could into non-payroll, because a lot of your employees may not have been working during that 8 weeks. This is going to create additional issues for smaller businesses, because of course smaller businesses are the ones that may have a lease back, that may own the little business that they work out of and operate out of. So this is going to punish disproportionately the number of people that are the smaller businesses that needed the money, the mom and pop that may own the building that the restaurant's in, or that the grocery store is in. And it's disappointing to see how late they come in with something like that. So again, mortgage interest payments are not eligible for forgiveness. I'm sorry, that should have said in addition to, in addition to the mortgage interest is not forgivable. So that's a typo at the end. So that's the update on PPP. U.S. Department of Labor came out with an update. This one relates to remote working, so I thought it was critical to throw it in here. It addresses FLSA. On August 24th, last Monday evening, they came out with a Field Assistance Bulletin, FAB 2020-5. I'll pull it up and dump it on the screen here in a minute so you can see it and I'll dump it in the chat session as well. It regards the employer's obligations to use reasonable diligence in tracking remote working. As you all will recall, since this started in March, one of the things I've been telling you is you needed to draft new policies and procedures to address the remote working. The FLSA finally caught up with that guidance that I've been given for 5 months now. Their guidance is good for employers. It's just something you need to be mindful of, because now that it's out there in a field assistance bulletin, if you screw up now, you don't really have an excuse. And their answer is this. First, what I've told you for months, you are obligated to compensate non-exempt employees for all hours worked. It does not matter whether you tell the employee only work between 8:30 and 4 o'clock. Take your breaks. None of that matters. If it is a non-exempt employee, you are obligated as an employer to pay for all hours worked, which is why you lock your door. It's why you instruct your people to go home. It's why you don't let them work overtime. It's why you tell them not to work at home, not to answer emails, because a non-exempt employee, you cannot just go on the fact that I tell them not to work past 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock or whatever the day is. If you have and it's a second bulletin here, even if it is not requested to perform work, if the employer has reason to believe the work is being performed, and this goes outside of COVID, if you have employees answering emails after hours and they're a non-exempt, i.e. hourly employee, non-salaried, non-professional, administrative, professional, administrative, executive, and exempt in other ways. If they fall outside of those exemptions, they are non-exempt. You have to pay them time and a half. If they're answering emails after hours, you're supposed to pay them. That's why you instruct your employees not to. That's why you literally can discipline your employees for answering emails after hours, because they are not allowed to do so. It can result in overtime, and you do have to pay them for all hours worked. And it says on the second one, these are just reminders under the FLSA, not the new guidance. The second one, you're required to exercise your control to see that work is not performed. It is your burden as the employer. You must pay upon actual knowledge or constructive knowledge. Constructive knowledge, you see emails coming from your administrative assistant, secretary, receptionist, factory worker, someone who is an hourly employee responding to issues after hours. You know that that person's working, and you are required to pay them or to stop them from answering those emails. If they're on vacation, you can't have them working, or you're supposed to pay them for that time working, whether they are on vacation or not. Those types of things. So the DOL came out and said, all right, we recognize remote work creates issues. We tell you you have to do things and it's your burden and you have control of the employee relationship. You must shut them down, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now they've changed it to saying, and these are exact quotes, you must exercise reasonable diligence. In doing that, it is mandatory now that you have a work schedule policy, and that policy must require clear recording of hours and reporting of hours by your employees working from home. These are non-exempt, not your professionals, not your administrative, not your executive. These are people who are hourly employees. You must have clear reporting and recording policies and obligations on your employees. If you have a proper work schedule and you have proper recording and reporting, and you assure this third point that they talk about in their new FAB, that there is a consistent enforcement across all non-exempt positions. If you are requiring all management to consistently and persistently enforce policies and procedures that are well written, that require the recording and reporting of hours, then if the employee fails to report unscheduled hours, this is a direct quote, the employer is generally not required to investigate further into the circumstances involving the employee working additional hours. This is a big update because working remotely is a big issue. They're 5 months late on it, but basically what it says is if you have a well-written policy, you follow the policy, you require them to record it, then if your employees are working extra hours and you don't have a reasonable belief that they are, i.e. you're not getting copies of emails, you're not getting notification from them at 10 o'clock at night that they just got through with a 5-hour project for tomorrow morning, then you're okay. If you do get that notice that they got, they've been working the last 5 hours on a project for tomorrow morning, the first thing you do is to tell them you are not authorized to work on that unless and until you get authority from the manager. Second thing to do is go ahead and pay them for that time. Third thing to do is enforce flex time and tell them you're not going to work on Friday or Thursday or whatever day you don't think they want off, and tell them the 5 hours they just worked will be comped on following days because they are not allowed to work overtime. So that's the update from the Department of Labor on how to handle. OSHA came out with guidance because of the respiratory issues. I know some of you on here are using the N95 masks. Little reminder on the N95 mask, we talked about this I think in May. If you have a center respirator in front of the mouth, keep in mind that is a paint or hazardous chemical, and it does expel. It is designed to keep droplets from coming in, but it literally is built to expel out. Those are not proper for COVID-19. They are still proper for paint or hazardous materials, but keep in mind, if you have a center front-facing N95, it literally expels your droplets out into the air further than not having a mask at all, so it's not protecting anyone around you. It is not a COVID-19 mask. That's your public service announcement for the day. The N95 mask is one of the ones that's included under the fit test and respirator for the OSHA. OSHA is using a compliance safety health officer. That's the CSHO person. If you're in the industry, you know what that person does. Basically, they're the tattletale that reports back and disciplines you for non-compliance. So the OSHA has come out with temporary additional guidance for respiratory protection standard under the CFR, Code of Federal Regulations. Due to the shortage of respirators, they issued temporary enforcement guidance allowing discretion when considering citations. They're allowing discretion from their compliance safety health officers on respiratory standards. You'll recall that part of the standards I gave in the past from OSHA was if you don't need to be requiring someone to wear a mask right now, suspend those operations, whether they're paint, whether they're hazardous, being exposed to potential carcinogens, whatever it is. They're asking that you not do those activities until there is a proper supply chain. You'll see at the end of this that comes back into play with these compliance officers. Discretion from the compliance officers is only applied when the circumstances are beyond the employer's control to prevent compliance, i.e., if there are no masks available, then you have the ability to not comply. That's the gist of what we're talking about here. So if you have the ability to comply, this does not apply to you. If you can get masks, you can't rely on this flexibility that they put into place. Employers must explore, these are the exact things that are in the new guidance. You must explore options, you must modify your practices, and you must ensure avoidance of any dangers. That's where they're asking that you not do it. If you can avoid not doing it, you must modify the use of masks, you must try to re-clean them if it's possible, so on and so forth. It is not a blanket waiver. non-compliance still violates the standard, even though they are saying that they're giving leniency on enforcement. It's still up to the CSHO, the Compliance Safety Health Officer. So keep in mind, they can still charge you with violation. You must comply as soon as it's possible with the supply chain issues and when those are resolved. The health officer, safety and health officer, will continue to investigate. What they're doing is they're going to, and I'm concerned because this makes it subjective, so if you don't like your health officer, good luck. Basically, the safety and health officer will determine compliance. They will determine policies, and they'll scrutinize your policies. They will determine how you handled alternative respirators and alternative measures and steps you took to not do paint, to not use hazardous materials, to realign what it is you're doing, and whether you are doing appropriate monitoring of the supply chain. And then they have the ability to, quote, objectively, to determine, quote, whether you have objectively engaged in reasonable efforts, and they will do their own analysis and determine whether or not to charge you. In other words, you have a government official who has full control to figure out whether or not you are doing appropriate measures if you aren't using an N95 mask appropriately. Not real comforting, but that is the new guidance they issued on Friday night. CDC came out with two that I thought were important enough to give that information to you. One, asymptomatic testing came out last Monday. This is subject to a lot of political commentary. I'm not going to talk about political on any of this ever, hopefully. I'll bash both sides, but I won't be one side or the other. Basically, this new guidance undoes a lot of the guidance that we've gotten recently. And I did it in exact quotes. I didn't put the end quote on there. I apologize, there was one and I don't know where it is. I could go in there really quick and put it in, but it's this one right here. If you've been in close contact, i.e. within 6 feet of a person with COVID for at least 15 minutes, but you do not have symptoms, you do not necessarily need a test unless you are a vulnerable individual or your healthcare provider or state or local public official recommends that you take one. This is a big change, and this is part of contact tracing. So as part of your contact tracing, under federal guidance, you are not mandated to do this unless a state or local official has instructed you to do so, or unless you wish to do so. This is the supposed asymptomatic change. In other words, don't rush out and take one if you don't feel the need, if you're asymptomatic, even if you've been exposed to someone that has it. You can go out, but they're trying, I believe, to keep the quick turnaround testing available. I do know from a personal situation in Kentucky, the testing used to be back within 24 to 48 hours, and then it became over a week because of the number of people doing the drive-through testing, and it got to the point where I think they're trying to keep it so that healthcare professionals can get testing done on people who need it quicker than those that are asymptomatic. So that's the update. Agree or disagree, doesn't matter. That's our CDC, just like they came out in March and April and said it was absurd for people to wear masks because masks would not help you at all. Now they mandate masks almost all the time unless you're in certain social gatherings that nobody comments on whether it's right or wrong for people to wear masks in. So that's, CDC's been all over the map on these things. I've told you before, don't follow CDC with regard to mandatory because they have no enforcement of law. You follow OSHA, EEOC, your local and state executive orders. CDC is guidelines. It's not a legal, it is a medical, and they bounce every day. I tried to keep up with it. I couldn't even put the number of listings that they have on their website every single day. So the other big one is this. Just so everybody understands the different terminology, I put this on here. It was Saturday night late. New guidance on antigen testing. First, they explained what diagnostic screening and surveillance testing. Surveillance testing is not utilized at all for an actual individual. It's community-based to see what the trends are. I don't know why they would be doing that right now. They should be focusing on those people that actually need it. This kind of goes against their suggestion that they're not doing testing of asymptomatic, yet surveillance testing is basically randomized testing of people without getting the report back to the individual that they may have tested positive. I don't know how that helps the individual or any of the shutting down of potential explosion of the positives, but that's what that's called. Screening testing or asymptomatic. Diagnostic means that you have the symptoms and you are being tested for the current infection. The antigen testing is a brand new one. It's responsive within 15 to 30 minutes. It's immunoassay testing. It detects the presence of a specific viral antigen. It's brand spanking new. It's what's used for the flu every year to see if you have the flu, also for strep and a few other things. It's just basically explaining when they're going to use it. I wanted to put it up there because it kind of tells you the different testings that are out there and that the rapid testing is coming into play. In all of these testings, they caution that the best one is still the one they stick up in your brain, and that after you test positive on this, yes, I'm being sarcastic, but if you've had it, you know what I'm talking about. They don't really hit your brain, but they come close, right, Lyle?
Yeah.
So those are the types of testing.
I asked my wife if it was I asked my wife if it was poking out the back.
So those are the types of tests that are out there. All right, last one is a Kentucky update. I want to add on to this the unemployment. I was hoping to have an update. They don't really have one other than they're going to clamp down on e-claims. Last executive order, I've talked about the last 3 weeks. It still is May the 11th. You know, you look at the nationwide and you pull up the Kentucky and it still lists May the 11th plus July the 27th of shutting down bars, August the 10th of reopening the bars on limited basis with restaurants on limited basis. No other guidance for businesses. I just went to the national to see if anybody even, maybe I'm missing something, maybe it's out there and I'm just not able to read or comprehend. It's not out there. The orders are shutting down business and sectors, but they're not giving general guidance, which is frustrating. Friday, here's your brand new update. Friday, the Attorney General, on behalf of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, for those that don't know, the Attorney General represents the state. The governor is the executive of the state. Legislature introduces laws into the system. So the governor is not in control, but he's issued over 150 orders since March. The Attorney General, on behalf of the state of Kentucky, filed the brief from Commonwealth of Kentucky's perspective against the executive orders in the Kentucky Supreme Court. You'll recall 2 weeks ago I pointed out the Boone County and the Scott County orders, that the Supreme Court was having oral argument on September the 17th. So the brief from the state of Kentucky was filed on Friday. It's a very interesting read when it walks down through the number of steps that have been taken by the governor without authority from legislature and without authority from executive order. Our statute spells out what the governor can and can't do. I actually was very impressed with the way that the order or the brief was submitted, walking down through from the beginning of time. If it was, for example, the Speedway was one of the defendants named, and the Speedway walked down through, or they walked down through on behalf of the Speedway, the March order, the April order, the May order, the June, July orders, how that impacted them. The fact that each one of these are without statutory authority, whether it's under the executive action under 39A of our statute chapter, or whether it was emergency related, there are certain steps that have to be taken for each individual order where he must spell out the emergency basis for it, the fact that the local government has asked for this, that they're doing this in response to local government inability to handle the situation, which is why Boone County challenged it. There's a lot of steps that have to be taken. Thus far, and this is not a political statement, this is fact, every single federal court that has heard our governor's executive orders has struck it down as unconstitutional. The Attorney General actually attaches each one of those orders. There are 6 different cases in which it was struck down, and then in addition to that, Boone County and Scott County. I do expect the Supreme Court to rule rather quickly on this, but quickly in our Supreme Court means a couple of weeks to a month or two. Typically, if I have a case in front of the Supreme Court, it takes them 6 months to a year after it's been briefed, so this will be very rapid, but it's still going to take that long, unless they rule from the bench, that would be extraordinarily rare. There are 7 justices that would have to vote on it right there, and that just doesn't happen. It's hard to get 3 of them to agree to do anything, much less 7. So I don't expect that to happen. So that's your update on the Kentucky side. I will add to that the fact that the Unemployment Office has put the following out. The insurance claims, they're talking about Governor Beshear, this part in the middle, where Kentucky's application for additional federal unemployment assistance was approved. Reconfiguring it will take some time. Then they talk about this timeline's a joke. So this has been up here since the beginning of the pandemic. Nothing has changed. They say 15 days you'll get paid. We have people since March that still haven't gotten paid, so I don't know what they're talking about there. I have seen and I have received emails from certain people in the unemployment insurance office that have started to ask, hey, how's your claim? Is everything okay on your claim? A lot of the people have literally been ignoring that. I'm one of those on behalf of an employer. It kind of sickens me because those employees started to go back to work and tried to get paid something somewhere, and a lot of them just quit submitting their unemployment application. It's disappointing to see what the government has done and has not done to take care of those situations. I was trying to pull that back up on the screen. No, that's not it. So I lost it. One other thing I will put up, I'm done with the update, other than there are 2 things available on covid19.ky.gov. One of them is the colleges, all of the state colleges, with the exception of at least one, because they left, I said that this morning to the Hanna Resource group. They omitted Kentucky State University, which was a little surprising, seeing as though it's in Frankfort, and you would think they would put it on there. The rest of them are on here with the number of positives, recovered active cases, ever positive, and number of deaths. It's important on all of these to see there are 0 deaths among the young people, both at the college level and the, did I back out of it and omit it? I did. Here's the K through 12. The one thing I wanted to comment on this, I think that there are certain locations of schools that are lying. And I actually believe that there's also some issues with how our state is dealing with recovery. If you look at the nationwide statistics, what we're calling recovery is not the same as what most states are calling recovery. Most states have an 85% recovery rate, and ours is ridiculously low, along with New Jersey and New York. It's as if we don't ever have anybody recover. They just literally continue with the disease forever. I don't know what the definition is, but the reason why I think this one is ridiculous is Fayette County, I'm highlighting it, is the only one reporting, basically. Jefferson County has 0 new positive, 2 recovered, 2 have ever had it. and staff, 1 had it. Fayette County is the only one reporting across the entire state, basically, and I know that because there's a total of 116 and 304, and Fayette County has 88 of 116, 65 of 162, 40 of 142, and 105 of the 304 total. The numbers also don't add up to 304 total. I went through and did it. I don't know where they're getting their numbers, but everything's a 0. And I know that they had testing. I don't know. This is on the KY COVID website, and it's on the Kentucky schools. But Jefferson, there's no way Jefferson's only had 2 ever, with the rest of them having 1 or 2, and then Fayette County's the only one with a realistic number. So that's your update, and I can try to answer some questions, or we can wait till the end.
Well, you got a couple on there. Why don't you take those right now? And Allison?
Okay. So I'll ask them some of these. Your answer may be that it's more about tax law, and you're not going to be able to provide much more. But if an employer elects to continue withholding the employee's portion of the Social Security taxes, will the employee be able to claim a refund of what the employer had withheld?
Probably not, because it is a holiday. It is not a refund. So basically, the employee still owes this. It's just when the employee is going to have to pay it. So that's why I was saying it's kind of a mess, because basically the employer can withhold it. You can give it to the employee until December 31st, and then starting January 1st, either you are going to have to, you the employer, either you're going to have to voluntarily pay that contribution from the employee to make it up before April 30th, or you're going to have to charge them for the January 1st to April 30th quarter, and from September 1st to December 31st, you're going to have to double down to get that money, because right now what it basically amounts to is you still owe it as the employer. It's still your obligation as the employer to collect it. You just didn't collect it. One of the questions that came to my mind was, okay, so I've got an employee that owes this from September 1st to December 31st, and they quit, retire, get fired on December 31st or sometime, who cares when. I can't collect it from the employee starting January 1st. What do I do as the employer? Am I going to come out of pocket for that employee because the employee wasn't employed in the first quarter of 2021? I see all kinds of nightmarish situations where somebody's on disability, somebody quits, somebody dies, somebody retires. This is an employer responsibility to pay in the employee's share. This says you are going to pay that share in the first quarter of 2021. So if the employee jumps ship and leaves, you're left holding the bag. I suspect there will be additional frequently asked questions that will clean this up and say, oh, well, obviously, if they're not employed, you're not going to owe it. Well, okay, how are you coming up with that? But that's the type of thing. When I said earlier, this was, going back to it, not well written. I said not well written. I was being very kind with my language, because something like this from the federal government should have all kinds of information in it as to, okay, for those employers at the end of the year, if your employee is no longer employed, then this, and this is what will happen. That's what should have been in this. It is someone's job at the government, at the IRS, to have all of these circumstances spelled out so that when they come out with this policy, it covers employers under every single potential example. We've seen how thick their regulations are for the IRS. I'm motioning, 6 inches thick for the regulations when you try to file your taxes. Surely to goodness they could have come up with something that was better than the page and a half that's on the link in the chat session. It's really poor. It's not well done. It does not provide guidance. And before anybody gets political, no, this isn't the president. No, this isn't Congress. This is whoever's in charge of the IRS. And the IRS did not come up with a cogent or a smooth explanation for what to do on this. They very easily could have said, unless employee is no longer employed following the beginning of the year, or additional guidance will be forthcoming after the first of the year, which is what the president requested. But they came out with basically, if you withhold it, you're only withholding it till December 31st, then you're going to pay it all and you'll pay double next year. And it doesn't say what to do if the person's not there.
Okay, great. And then another question about the tax deferrals. If an employer opts not to participate, so does not allow employees to defer the withholding, can employees individually challenge employers on this? Would it be?
I don't believe so, because the guidance, I didn't mean to cut you off. The guidance from the federal government, I'm trying to see if I can pull that back up. Wrong one, sorry, wrong one again. Here it is. This guidance, if I can get it to show up on the screen. This guidance from the federal government uses the word, I'm looking for the exact word. And some people, when it first came out, said that that this was mandatory. And I mean on Friday. I don't mean back when I said I wasn't sure whether it was mandatory. This is the guidance, a grand total of 2.5 pages. The last page here is a waste because it's just drafting information. This is about the payment of it, when it will have to be paid. But the press release that accompanied this is the important one. And it says in here, allowing employers to defer withholding. It doesn't mandate, it allows. So, unless you see the word mandate from the IRS, this is an allowance. It means that employees cannot sue you if you're allowed to do it, but you elect not to. There's one other question. Huh?
Employer choice.
Yeah, basically it's an employer choice. I suspect we're going to see, I think that the president's probably going to come out, because this came out Friday night. I think the president, maybe even today, because it's the last day in August, will come out with something, because I don't think that this executive order did anything of what he was hoping to do, which was to put money in the employees' hands. I think the IRS kind of tied his hands on it, so I suspect there's going to be some kind of, may not be another executive order, but some type of an attempt to explain frustration over why this is not getting done. So that's the press release. The other question in there, the question about, we have a second tenant under another company name. When we claim the mortgage interest as rent, do we split the mortgage interest? What you can do there is you can identify the rent on, let's see, you own your building. So no, both of you cannot claim the mortgage interest. One of you will get the mortgage interest, which is the owner of the building. The other one can claim the lease paid unless it's a controlled entity, meaning it's another, even though it's a tenant, let's say that it's a subsidiary that's leasing a part of the business. That subsidiary leasing part of the business would be trapped into the mortgage interest of the owner. So it kind of depends on what that tenant is. The tenant could potentially get PPP money if they qualified for the total amount of their rent, unless they're a controlled entity. So that's that one.
All right. Is that it, Allison?
I believe so.
Okay,
well, there's one that just came in about how do we hold school districts accountable for reporting properly. But I think that's more of a, I don't know if any of us have the answers to that one.
All right.
Yeah, the district, the reason why I put that up on the screen, that was Kim's comment. The reason why I put that on the screen is that it does cause concern that Jefferson's the easy one to pick out. Jefferson, the county, has over 13,000 people that have tested positive versus Fayette with, I think, 6. Don't quote me on the exact numbers. you would have to think that at least 1 or 2 students and 1 or 2 staff would be positive in a county that is double the next highest number, and yet they show 0. And they're in football practice, they're in cheerleading practice, just like they are in Fayette County. Fayette County's doing all the testing and all of the follow-up on anybody that has a fever or anything else, asymptomatic family testing and so on. I think that there's a problem with, I'm picking on Jefferson, but I think there's a problem with at least that one. The question from Rachel, and then I'll hand it back and we'll answer any others at the end. Am I seeing that most employers are not deferring? The answer is yes. I would not. I think the recommendation I gave a couple of weeks ago and that I've heard most people doing is do not take the money out of your employees' hands without understanding what it is that you're going to have to do. Now that the IRS has come in and basically said, yeah, you can do this, but you owe the money and you still have to deposit the money as if you're withholding it. Not your part, not the employee's part. You still have to deposit your part. And then the employee's part, sure, you can give it to them, but on January 1st, start doubling up. And the basically insecurity of what happens if somebody dies, retires, quits, gets fired. What are you going to owe that person's portion because they worked for you until they died, they retired, they got fired, or they quit? You're going to owe that part in the first part of the year, but you don't have an employee working for you that you can deduct it from. So they walked with your money in pocket, and now you're responsible for it. With the uncertainty going on, I hate to say it because I'd love to put the money in people's pockets, but now that the IRS has spoken on it and spoken unwell, or not with clarity, I would not voluntarily withhold from an employee. And yes, that's a change from where I was when the executive order came out, but this clarity scares me to death as an employer, because you could end up holding the bag on a lot of employees' salaries with the employees' share if they leave their employment, especially if you have a transigent population of employees, people that move a lot, leave, quit. I don't think I would take this on if I were you. Just, that's my 2 cents worth.
All right, thank you, Jim. Appreciate it very much. Allison, the questions, if people think of more questions, you can put them down there and we'll try to get to them. I want to introduce John Coffey again. He's our Director of Talent Acquisition, and he's going to talk about the challenge of hiring during this COVID-19 crisis. John, take it away.
All right. Yeah, can everybody hear me okay? Hopefully. Thanks for having me. So today, what we wanted to do is just kind of give an overarching look at, what the labor market is doing. Certainly with COVID, we've seen some challenges in the beginning and some maybe smoothing out over time. So wanted to just start by giving everybody a quick snapshot. So we'll cover that first. And our second part, we'll kind of go into the interview process. We know that there's a lot of change management and a lot of structural, procedural changes. So we want to give some guidance and some good best practices there. And then certainly as we kind of get into the fold, hiring, how hiring is happening, how that's changed, things to think about and consider there. We felt we'd give some just good overview on what we're seeing with some of the employers that we're working with. And then also at the end, I think we're gonna certainly want to open it up and get some perspective from you guys, because we know that for sure you're kind of going through this as well, just like we are, and just like our clients are. And so certainly if anybody has some good best practices, we'd love to open it up and share. So we're going to start off with just kind of diving into how does the market look right now? What do I really need to be thinking about that might impact how we attract talent? So I thought it'd be kind of good to just give you this. I always kind of pay attention to this every couple of weeks. The Bureau of Labor Statistics with the Department of Labor, they'll give sort of an update. But if we go all the way back to March, unemployment started off really around in the 14.8%. So we saw a huge spike. April was actually probably one of the worst months for Kentucky. as a whole, but nationally we've kind of migrated down to actually below 10%, which is a good sign. So we're kind of, and again, this is uninsured employment claim or insured employment claims, sorry. Wanted to preface that because, you know, of course, the number would be higher if we talk about uninsured employment claims. But we're seeing a migration downward in the trend nationally. That is a good sign. We know that employers are starting to hire again. Employees are starting to return back to work, so that's certainly good news. But the not so great news is really we're seeing some industries are really doing better than others. Overall, you know, looking at our Lexington and greater Kentucky sort of labor market, we are seeing percentages that are, you know, certainly spiking up and down. So if you look at information, professional, business services, government, hospitality, we're seeing a higher percentage of impact, so closer to, you know, 10 to 14% versus some of the other areas like education, healthcare, finance, and even manufacturing. I know that'd be surprising for some, but the overall impact is actually a little bit lower percentage-wise than some of those other categories. So as we sort of move on, just wanted to kind of keep that in perspective because we know that that's going to certainly kind of impact what your talent pool is going to look like from one industry to the next, and we just wanted to be cognizant there. So what does this mean for finding the right talent during the pandemic? Well, you know, based on that industry that you're focused on, you're going to have a higher pool of candidates, one versus the other. But really what we know is going to kind of remain constant here is the narrative and the conversation with candidates may actually need to change to win them over. So there's a lot of great surveys out there, a lot of people collecting information on how the overall impact as it relates to labor looks. Just one little snippet of data, Wonderman Thompson put out a survey, and I thought this was kind of indicative into the headspace of what candidates and employees that are looking to make moves are really thinking about. But when asked about work relative to COVID-19, at least 37% of employees, you know, have said that they've shifted to working from home by direction of their employer, just based on, you know, kind of going through COVID like all of us have. But when possible in the current climate, they're saying that, you know, 73% are believing that the employer should be allowing you to do more. So you see that gap. There's sort of a, this is what my employer's letting me do. This is what I feel comfortable with. And so there's some writing on the wall there around how employees and candidates alike are, you know, really internalizing, you know, what work should look like during the pandemic and how employers are handling that. So when we talk about talent acquisition, we certainly still have to talk about talent management because we got to look about what your current employees are thinking and what their concerns are, what their worries are, and their likelihood for, you know, attrition potentially, and then you're also looking at your candidate population. So looking at that, you know, we're going to really take just a spotlight on some of the things we think are most important here. So we've got 4 things that we really think that this is what candidates are focusing on the most. One is how a company is really handling COVID-19, what their protocols are internally and externally. So if you're talking internal, you know, do I feel safe at work? Do I feel like my employer is being transparent with me about any changes, any impacts, et cetera? And then externally as a candidate, you know, the company that I'm looking at, how are they handling COVID? What's their impact look like? And how would they treat me as a new employee? And do I feel like it's a stable place to move to? And then secondly, you know, now more than ever, we're seeing candidates having a heavy evaluation on working from home. And so it's becoming a more increasingly important discussion point, obviously more for the exempt side, right? Some of those non-exempt positions, we know in even certain industries, this isn't even an option, but where it can be an option, we're certainly seeing candidates focus there more. Thirdly, candidates are doing more homework on employers, so they're taking note of what companies have laid off recently. Are they publicly sharing signs of financial turmoil? Are they're out there listening to employees? If you look at some of those social media platforms like Glassdoor, they've been pretty busy on, hey, you know, my employer's been not very upfront with what's going on from a response perspective, or they haven't been transparent, or, you know, our employer's been great and they've treated me really well, and I'm so glad to still be here. So some of that information is certainly being a lot more scrutinized than before. And then finally, passive candidates we're finding in those volatile industries, they're a little bit more inclined to stay put versus entertaining new opportunities, because we're recruiting across a lot of different industries here. And in some, where there's a little bit more instability, I think we're finding that candidates are a little bit more, less inclined to make the leap, so to speak. So that's something certainly to think about there. And so, what we thought would make sense here was just to give some suggestion and guidance for reinforcement and engagement. So what do I need to really be thinking about how we attract talent? Going back to that question, well, I think it starts with partnering with your leaders. This isn't something that HR alone or talent acquisition, talent management alone can handle. This is an overall executive conversation, right? So you got to work with leadership to outline and get the buy-in you need to share your strategy, not only internally, but also externally, to increase that employer and candidate confidence. One of the things that you see a lot during these sort of unstable times, if we even go back to the recession, several years ago, is that, some employers might say, well, hey, we're going to have a hiring freeze, but at the end of the day, they're actually out there posting jobs, and their internal employees are kind of disgruntled at that point, because they're seeing that, the message says one thing, but the actual story is different. So I think you want to partner with your leaders, make sure that you're on the same page, make sure that you're transparent with your workforce. That's going to go a long way. Also, be ready to address the elephant in the room. So by that, I kind of mean, if a candidate comes into your process, they might say, hey, you know what, I noticed you're laying off, or you had a really bad quarter last quarter. Candidates are going to pay more attention to that. So I think, with your recruiters, with your HR team, with your frontline folks that are having those conversations, making sure that they are kind of scripted and understand what that messaging should look like. Be ready to address it, because they're going to ask it, folks. And then also promote work from home flexibility if it exists. I know this seems to be a common sense term nowadays, just based on all of our impact with COVID. But if you are a company that's working from home or allowing that temporarily or permanently, then I think you should be sharing that heavily, because that's going to reinforce, especially with some of those candidates in the passive lane. Active would be applying, or passive being more along the lines of, you're trying to find them or get them to come over to your company. Well, this could be a reinforcing topic for you. So those are three there. We've got a few more here for you as well. I think assessing and addressing, so being proactive in communicating how your company is adapting during, these times, finding the strategy to win, constantly really understanding how the public is perceiving you. Again, going back to that number one topic, partner with leadership to address questions that arise. So out of kind of going through this exercise, you're going to probably need to recalibrate, revisit, and identify gaps, and just figure out how you're going to address that and what's your plan moving forward. And then reviving your marketing strategy. I think this is very, very important. I believe working with marketing to create evidence through your messaging and job posting, that your company's interviewing safely, right? You're following protocols, how employees or a prospective employee can be confident working with you during the pandemic, or, hey, it's an exciting time. Regardless of the pandemic, you might be one of those, companies that's actually growing. And I think those are the messages and the stories that you want to be telling with your marketing team, for sure. So looking at interviewing, kind of moving into that's really kind of sourcing, framing up the market, what the talent population's looking at. But now we're thinking about interviewing. I think regardless, before we talk about retooling the interview process, what you really need to start with is assessing your protocols relative to COVID that could touch your impact to candidates. So a few things to think about there. How are you handling visitors or external vendors at your company? Is that a process that you're mirroring with your candidates today? Maybe in the midst of all this, since March, you've kind of carved out a plan of, hey, this is how we handle visitors, or this is how we handle candidates. Just making sure that everybody's kind of on the same page with that, I think, would go a long way. And then, trying to find out longer term, hey, how long are we planning on having the strategy in place for? Do we want to modify this permanently? But again, you got to go back to your leadership and get buy-in. Are you including in the interview email confirmation with candidates of someone's interview slot information, like what's required of them coming into the process? So if I'm a candidate walking into an employer, do I need to wear a mask? Should I be prepared to have my temperature taken? Am I going to sit in a room and have social distancing in place? You know, those sort of things are extra bits of information that you're probably going to want to think about certainly sharing and having a game plan for. Additional factors that we want to look at here would be, you know, are you a company or an organization that's going to provide PPE for candidates in the process, or do you want to require it of them? And again, that's a conversation you need to be thinking about in advance to help kind of make sure that you have a seamless interview process in place. Also, are your managers going to be tasked with disinfecting the space, or is there a cleaning crew that goes behind folks when they come in externally and come on site? And you know, what protocols do you have there? And do you have the ability to encourage and facilitate meetings outside, perhaps? So maybe you're going to modify or alter, you know, how that interview process works. Maybe you're used to having those conference rooms booked, but folks, if you can go outside to a picnic table or a bench and set it up and it's a nice day, maybe that makes sense. So those are things to, again, have alternate plan Bs in your workflow. Now, when we talk about interview recommendations, you know, really, I know it seems pretty common sense, but a lot of employers we are definitely seeing using video interviews to replace early face-to-face interviews. I think what we're seeing more of is that the steps in the process are being either consolidated or changed so that the amount of face-to-face early upfront contact is limited until later in the game. So maybe you start with a phone interview and you go to a face-to-face interview right away. Well, now maybe that's switched to, let's just do a phone interview and then a video interview, and then with a finalist or two, we go to a face-to-face. That's one simple example. We're seeing employers approaching it in a variety of ways. Some employers we work with are only doing video interviews altogether. If there is a requirement of an on-site sort of, you know, hey, let's walk around and look at the facility and view that together, they're really kind of narrowing that down more so. I think we're seeing to the finalist or two versus having all candidates go through that same step. So a little bit more scrutiny in the process is what we're saying there. No contact greeting, so obviously no shaking hands, you know, fist bumping, that kind of stuff, limiting the number of people allowed. Maybe in a conference room, if you're doing a lot of interviews through the day, maybe you need to kind of have a 2-day interview process or to spread it out a little bit more so you have better protocols in place and you can manage it a little bit easier. Aerial cleaning, obviously before and after a candidate is on site, is helpful. We have a client that we are working with currently out in Indiana. It's a bottling facility, and they are checking temperatures when they come in. We are making sure that the candidates are provided PPE, and you know, along with that, you know, once they're in the conference room and out, we're cleaning up after them. So again, it's just kind of depending on the type of facility that you need to take advantage of for the interview process. If it's got to be a heavy part of it, just making sure those protocols are in place, and then otherwise, if you can avoid it altogether and just do the video stuff, that's great. Just things to think about, and then find opportunities to, again, I think the point that I mentioned earlier is the main point, to further narrow candidates in the process prior to those on-site visits, right? So have a better perspective, try to add more layers if you need to for that decision making, so that finally when you're ready to make a call, you've got maybe one or two that are going to go through that on-site visit and mitigate risk a little bit better that way. Other hiring considerations I think that are important right now really would just be educating leaders in the decision making. You know, I think we're seeing now in the talent fold trends of employees that have been laid off since March. You know, that's a conversation that maybe your hiring managers don't understand. So we've got to help encourage leadership to take note that a candidate may have abruptly lost a position back then. You think that might be common sense, but trust me, and you guys know this, especially some of you that work in HR, your managers are kind of linear and just looking at their day-to-day, and they're just going to spotlight a resume and say, well, gosh, you know, somebody hasn't been in work a few months ago. So you're going to have to help kind of tell that story and get to the bottom of it. I think also learn the motivating factors for your candidates. Candidates are a little bit more, they're not going to be as easy as they were pre-COVID, right, to get them to sign on the dotted line. I think they're going to look at stability, certainly, more so than, you know, aggressive growth opportunity or even compensation increase. We're seeing a lot more of that in the dialogue as they go through the process. Also, be very, we recommend you just be fair and transparent. Candidates are, you know, constantly going to be educating themselves in the process and understanding that as they interview with employers. You know, I think we've had a lot of success with candidates understanding things might move slower than normal. You have less manpower, maybe you're spread thin, maybe this is a critical role. You know, so instead of making several interviews in a week, maybe that's spread over 3 weeks. So I think just being transparent with the candidate and saying, you know, look, this is what our process looks like. It may actually spread out a little bit longer, but at least giving them some kind of a sense of how long, you know, the process may look. And of course, our recommendation is if you can work with your leadership to remove some of those steps and make it a little bit faster, that may be ideal, just depending on what you're able to do. And then communicate frequently. Again, common sense stuff, but repeating what you already know. Of course, it just seems like it's you know, redundancy, but opening up the channels and just sharing with candidates how things are going, what you know is going on. If you're in HR or you're in the recruiting process, I think just gives further reinforcement to a candidate that you're serious, that they're important in the process, and that your company is still interested in hiring for that role, for sure. So those are just some of the recommendations that we had. Now, finally, I think as we kind of narrow things down here, we wanted to just open up the channels to you guys. These are just some best practices and tips that we had from the employers that we're working with and some of our partners that we're talking to all the time. But we felt, you know, we've got a lot of good minds on this call, and it made sense to maybe reach out and get, you know, anything that you guys are maybe doing as employers in HR or, you know, in leadership that have really made it an effective impact on interviewing or the hiring process in general, just modifying because of COVID. So we'd love to kind of open it up there. Allison, if we've got anyone that messages us, we can do that too, but just figured we'd open it up and see if anyone had any other good input.
Thank you, John. And Chase, if you'll drop the slides, we'll put the photos up. And we've had a couple of good questions come in on chat. Jim has jumped right in and answered some of them. Some more feedback about the whole payroll tax challenge. And I think we found that other people agree it's pretty confusing, and maybe we ought to avoid it until we get a lot more clarity around it. So folks, go ahead and take off the mute on sound too, Chase. And okay, if anybody's brave enough and wants to say something about, let's start out with responding to what John asked. Does anybody have any success stories they want to share about recruiting right now? And if you want to turn on your camera, feel free to do that too. We'd love to see you.
Lyle, I went ahead and since we shut down the slideshow a little early, I wanted to let everybody know the HRCI and SHRM codes are in the chat session.
Ah, yes, thank you. Here you go. I can read those out right now.
Lyle, you're muted.
Rookie mistake, Lyle. You muted yourself.
Mute myself. Oh my gosh. Thank you. I wonder how long I've been muted. Hey, I've got those codes for you. If you want an HRCI code, it is 532509. 532509. And the SHRM code is 20-S3RHQ. S is in Sam, 3, R is in Robert, H is in Hannah, and Q is in crazy. I didn't use the real codes. Listen, then if you didn't hear me say that if John wanted to wrap up with any success stories, we've opened up your status so you can turn on your camera if you'd like. We'd love to see you. Hello, Carl. Thanks for joining us from Indiana. Good to see you. Tiffany. Oh, Tiffany, it'd be fun to hear you say a word or two. You've got a lot of great experience, Tiffany.
Hi, Lyle. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to share, I mean, you cannot stress how important, especially on the recruiting side, communication, making sure you're keeping current with those candidates. Just because, again, you may think they're really interested in your position. They're probably a few more down the line as well, especially if they're really skilled right now. So those were great points, Sean, on the slides around that piece of it, just because, and again, trying to encourage managers to go ahead and make some decisions in a timely manner. I think that's a huge piece to make sure that we get done what needs to get done, because you hate to lose a good candidate, you know, by less than 24 hours. On that piece. So, but yeah, no, I mean, I think, again, just in general, we're all still trying to figure out what to do with everything that that we're facing right now. But the remote work tips and everything, I think those are spot on for sure.
All right. Somebody else want to make a comment? Carl, were you raising your hand? I like that.
Analog. The point Tiffany made about speed is real, and whatever you can do to interact with the prospect through messaging, through whatever channel they are most comfortable in, the speed of at least that initial response is crucial. Second, if you're really trying to build a high-performing culture, front load all sorts of ethics standards and values into your job descriptions and your advertising, because there's a lot of candidates out there. The high performers want to work in an ethical culture, and they're often not seeing that in the national media. They're not seeing that where they are now. And so I'm finding that is a good drawing card. And then just finally understand that these candidates that are out there are really well prepared to fool us. Because if you go to Amazon and look for books on good interview answers to tough questions, there's 10,000 titles out there. And so you may need some advanced assessment tools or some good structured interviewing to make sure that, newsflash, during an interview, both parties are lying. Just remember that.
Is there something you want to say?
Thank you, Carl. All right, anybody else want to add any comments? I said at the first of the call that we might talk about working from home versus working at work. Anybody having a hard time getting people back to work? All right.
One thing that came to mind that I wanted to bring up based on what Carl and Tiffany said, and thank you guys for that, was, you know, in the interview process, we talked about video interviews. I think we're also finding candidates need a little bit more TLC, you know, with training on how to use the interview software in advance of those interviews. So, you know, carving some extra time there has gone a long way with us as well. I don't know if anyone else on the call is seeing that, but I thought that'd be a good shout out, because we're having to train technology as well as, you know, kind of keep moving the needle on our end. So.
Right. So if you want your candidates to do well, make sure they know how to use the technology. Give them a little practice if you have to. Absolutely. Okay. Hey, thank you all for joining us. Now's the last shot. It's a pretty easy thing to do. Turn your camera on, say hello, ask a question, make a comment. Well, Carl and Tiffany, thank you all for speaking up. John, nice job. Jim, as always, way to go. Good stuff. Anything? Oh, Jim, any new news come in while we've been sitting here?
I haven't, I wasn't able to really look over there and see, Lyle. Sorry.
We kid Jim because he's still doing slides at like 9 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock. Next week, we're off on Monday, or at least most of us are, right? But we're going to do this call on Tuesday next week. Is that okay with our team? Everybody willing to work on Tuesday? Okay. Next week, we're going to be Tuesday the 8th. You got your codes again, HRCI 532509 and SHRM 20-S3RHQ. Thank you all so much for joining us. Hope you have a wonderful week. Knock 'em dead. Stay on top.
Thank you all.
Stay healthy. I'm going to give you an update on what's happening at the health department next week. It's going to be interesting.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.